Hey, good morning. Happy Wednesday, everybody. It's our mid-morning check-in, this middle day of the week. We call it Coffee with PC. That's because I always bring a little bit of my cup of coffee, my mid-morning pick-me-up, in this really nice artistic mug here from Italy. Still think that's pretty cool to use. Hope you're having a great day. It's a holiday week. Tomorrow is July 4th, and I'm sure many of you have big plans, days off work, time spent with family. We'll have a lot of people in our neck of the woods here coming down to the Keys, and certainly with the parade going by, we're getting ready for that. Looking forward to hosting a lot of folks here on our church property tomorrow morning. Hopefully, there's a lot of heavy equipment out there that I think is going to be all cleared up and moved by that time. So looking forward to that. Hope your holiday week, if you've got that time off, is a good one, and if it is, especially grateful that you've taken time out of this day or week off to spend a few minutes with me as we wander through the gospel according to Matthew, one of the followers of Jesus who gives us his account of the life and ministry of Jesus. And we come today to chapter 14 to probably one of the best known miracles. I say that because it's the only miracle outside of the resurrection that is recorded in all four of the Gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all four use this incident in their record of the life of Jesus. So that tells us it's probably pretty significant. Of all the miracles he did and the ones that we know of, this one shows up in all four. We usually call it the feeding of the 5,000. Now, if we're honest, that's a misnomer because Matthew's account, which we're in today, tells us that number 5,000 in verse 20, that was just the men, verse 21, not counting or besides the women and children. So if you think of families together, not just the men that were there, we could be 10, or maybe some people estimate up to 20,000 people could have been on that hillside. But the number we go with is that 5,000. That's recorded here and elsewhere. The feeding of the 5,000. If you're familiar, you know he did it with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes. And I always like to say this. When I talk about it, I like to call them 5 mini muffins and 2 sardines, because we get in our mind, when we go get a loaf of bread, if you go to the local grocery store and get a loaf of bread, we think of a loaf of bread, or maybe back to childhood, that huge Wonder Bread, the kind of the longest loaf of bread you could buy. It's probably still at the store now, Wonder Bread, sliced up for your sandwiches. Or maybe you go to the bakery and buy a loaf of French or Cuban bread across the street at Pinecrest. You can get a loaf of Cuban bread. You say, well, that's pretty good if you have that many loaves of bread. Certainly not enough to feed 5,000 plus people, but that's something. But no, it wasn't that. This was probably just a small roll, muffin-sized thing that was made. And then the 2 fish, we go out here this time of year, mahi are out, the heat of the summer. Maybe you're catching some slammer dolphin out there, and think of a big 20-plus pound bull dolphin you can bring in. We're not talking that. This person, this young boy we learned from, I think John's gospel tells us he was a young boy that offers his meal, was just that. It was a lunch for a young boy. And so the fish isn't a massive thing or even a full fillet. It was probably just a couple of small sardine type fish, preserved, salted, for him to carry to have something to eat. And so Jesus takes those 5 loaves and 2 fish that this young boy offers up, and he prays over them, he blesses them, and he passes them out. And the remarkable thing is, as he passes them out to these 5,000 people, they just keep getting enough and enough and enough, so that at the end, they collect from the people 12 baskets full of leftovers. They end up with more than they started with, which is really quite, when you try to wrap your mind around it, doesn't really even make sense. But after all, isn't that what a miracle is? It's something that doesn't make rational sense. If it's rational, if it's logical, if it's normal, then it's not a miracle. It's just regular. But something like this, call it a miracle because you start out with a little and you end up with a lot. I remember a saying from years ago. I don't know who originated it. I'm sure it was a preacher somewhere. But it goes something like this: little is much in the hands of the Lord. And that's true, that our little bit, when we turn it all over to Jesus, he can take it and he can do more than we can imagine. But I want to point out really one thing here that I think ties this together with where we've been for the last few weeks. Because yes, as impressive as it is for 5,000 people who are hungry to get a meal with leftovers from such small beginnings, Remember what Jesus has been talking about and telling parables about over and over and over in the previous chapter, chapter 13. Over and over, Jesus had been talking about the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven is like. The kingdom of heaven is like. In fact, as we said last week, one of Jesus' first messages was repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near. In Jesus, the kingdom of heaven had come close to the people of earth. And they were getting kind of an experience of what the blessings and the amazing nature of the kingdom of heaven is like as Jesus was with them. And this would certainly be one of those moments. That in the kingdom of heaven, there's no one that goes hungry. There's no one that has a want of anything. It's the perfection. All of the difficulty on earth is wiped away there. And particularly in this regard, interesting if you want to look at language, the language that is used here that says he took the bread and he blessed it as he gave it out. If we talk about this Sunday, we're going to take the Lord's Supper or communion together. And we usually look at that passage that says, on the night he was betrayed, Jesus took bread and blessed it and gave it to his disciples. It's the similar, very much kind of language that's going on here. And one of the names of Jesus that we find associated with who he is he is the bread of life. And so we have here him taking bread and breaking it and distributing it along with the fish. At the Lord's Supper, we have him taking bread and breaking it and distributing it along with the cup. And at that point, he talks about this being symbolic of him, his body broken. But also, I think here we see that's sort of the reality that's to come, the communion, the Last Supper moment, where he's foreshadowing what's about to happen with his death and resurrection. Here, way before then, he's not foreshadowing in that negative sense the tragedy he will befall, but in a positive sense, what it means that the kingdom of heaven is near, that Jesus, as the bread of life, is here. He's come to meet the needs of the people. In this case, their need was they were hungry and they didn't have anything to eat. And he met that need. But the greatest need of our life isn't just food to eat, although that's pretty important. Without food to eat, we don't last long. I get that. But the greatest need of our life isn't just the physical, it's also the spiritual. And so Jesus, as the bread of life, meets that spiritual hunger that we have, that spiritual emptiness that we have, that requires his forgiveness, that requires his grace, that requires his salvation that he purchased when his body was broken, much like the bread at the Last Supper, and his blood was spilled, much like the cup at the Last Supper symbolized on the cross. All of these streams kind of run together throughout the Gospels to point to the person of Jesus. We learn, by the way, in this context, a lot of people follow Jesus because they got their belly full. In fact, that's what he says to the people in John right after this miracle. You're just following along because you got a nice meal. And some people do look to Jesus and say, what can I get out of it? How can I benefit from what you're doing? And without chasing that rabbit, let's just leave it at, yes, some people do that. But the ultimate benefit we get isn't anything material. It's not a full belly or provision in any way for this life, financial or otherwise. It is the forgiveness and grace that God has for us through Jesus, the bread of life. And I think in this miracle, Jesus is pointing forward to those bigger realities by meeting the need. And often Jesus would do that. He would, in the moment, meet the need to point to the bigger reality of who he was and the greater need of our lives, that for a Savior. And I think that's at work here in a very subtle, under the radar sort of way. But ultimately, if we're going to receive from Jesus the meeting of our greatest need, we have to take a cue from this little boy, and we have to be willing to trust Jesus with whatever it is we have. And just like this little boy, it won't prove to be thousands of loaves of bread and some a boat full of fish we pulled out. No, it'll be our meager little bit that we offer to Jesus and say, this is all I am, this is all I have. But in the hands of Jesus, and with faith and trust in him, we receive then the fulfillment and the fulfilling nature of what it means to receive salvation, forgiveness, and the promise that we too can be a part of that kingdom, not just in a temporal, unearthly way, as evidenced by 5,000 plus people being fed, but in an eternal way where there'll never be a need again. See, these people, some of them followed him because they had their belly full, because they knew one meal, they'd go hungry again. You know the beauty of Jesus as the bread of life, meeting our spiritual need? When he meets their physical need, it comes back. When he meets our spiritual need, he meets it for good. His forgiveness is good forever and ever. We don't have to get a refill. Now, we still sin, and he invites us to confess our sin. I get that, but that salvation moment, we don't have to redo. When we receive the grace of God and the forgiveness and salvation that he offers by honestly, fully trusting him and who he is and what he has done, then that need never comes back. That's settled for eternity. I hope you as we go through this gospel, are beginning, if you haven't already, to see the beauty and the marvelous reality of who Jesus is and what he came to do. I can't help but read Matthew or any of the scriptures and be constantly confronted with a freshness and a newness of the goodness and grace of God given to us. We always would love to talk more about that with you. If you want to have that personal conversation, just drop me a note. I usually put my email through this video. If you're watching on Facebook, you can contact us through there. Certainly, more than that, we'd love to have you join us. We talk about these sorts of things on Sundays, 9 a.m. here in our worship service. Love to have you join us if you're in town in the Keys, or maybe you just can check us out online. We stream our services through our website, 9 a.m. on Sundays as well. Let me say one quick thing, since it is the day before the 4th and that parade. We are planning to do our normal stuff, hot dogs, cotton candy, snow cones as part of the parade right out front. If you're looking for a place to watch the parade, this is usually a pretty good spot. We have a pretty big piece of property here right on US 1, lots of frontage. And then you can, come along and get a little snack or treat for you or your family as you wait for the parade to come by. We'll be out there tomorrow morning. Love to have you join us as we celebrate that holiday, the 4th of July. But more than that, love to have you join us on Sunday as we celebrate the great gift of Jesus, who brought as the bread of life the kingdom to bear. He brought the kingdom near to us when we place our faith in him, when we trust him. I encourage you to trust him. If you haven't, again, love to talk to you about it. I'm going to leave that with you. I think I've just about finished this cup of coffee. So I'm going to go get about the rest of my day to get ready for tomorrow. Hope to see you then, or if not then, on Sunday. Have a great rest of your week.